welcome to another series of Planted Unearthed talks in partnership with the National Trust here at the beautiful venue, Stourhead House, located almost perfectly in this beautiful wildflower meadow. In our latest series of talks titled Cool Design, Sustainable Futures, we'll be exploring how the design of places, spaces, and systems which mitigates the twin threats of climate crisis and biodiversity loss. Last summer, for the first time in recorded history, temperatures in the UK were rising in excess of 40 degrees centigrade. And according to the United Nations report published just last month, the world is almost certainly set to see record temperatures over the next 5 years, with temperatures likely to rise by more than 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. So as we enter uncharted territory, the threats posed to human civilization, ecosystems, economies, and global infrastructure are only just about to become fully understood. In a world which is hotting up, what role does design play in keeping us cool and creating a world where humans can live in harmony with nature and natural systems? So I'm delighted to present today our sixth talk of the current festival, entitled Paying the Price for Food, where we'll be investigating how food security has not been under threat during modern times to the extent which it has been today. So how do we maintain the drive for more localised food production, which most consumers want, whilst keeping costs down and, importantly, the quality of produce up? So we've got three fantastic and varied speakers, experts in their fields, to elaborate and investigate the subject today. So we've got Jenny Chandler, author and chef. We've got Peter Prescott from Cultjar and Warminster Farms, and Nick Sinfield from Teals. So the format of the talk is that I'm going to ask each of our speakers to introduce themselves for a few minutes, tell you a little bit about their experience and background. We've then got a little bit of time for discussion and questions from myself for about 30 minutes. And then we're going to leave the last 15 minutes for questions from you, the audience. So if you've got any questions as we go through, write them down. We may answer them. If not, put your hands up at the end. We'll be sending a microphone round. And please do make sure it's a question rather than just a statement, because I won't allow that statement bit. So to kick us off, I'd like to introduce Jenny Chandler to the stage to introduce herself for a few minutes. Jenny.
Hi, I'm a Bristol-based food writer, chef, stroke cook, depending on what environment I'm working in, and also a cookery teacher. And I've been in the food business for around 40 years. I sort of trained as a chef at Heath many years ago and then worked on sailing boats in my 20s. And then the last sort of 20 years, I would say I've really been focusing mostly on sharing, sort of teaching and writing. I do a lot of work for Borough Market. I write for them and do sort of demos for them. And I've also taught at various cookery schools around the country. And my passion, I'm absolutely focused on wildlife and the environment. My husband makes wildlife films. And so I kind of hear on a daily basis about the rapid loss of habitat and different species. So that really kind of fires me. And also, I would say health too. The idea that food should be something that nourishes and nurtures rather than something which is purely edible. And over the years, I've written various books. I'd say probably the ones that are most sort of relevant to today. I wrote a book called Pulse, which was about cooking with sort of chickpeas, lentils, peas and beans in a modern way. And during the whole sort of process of writing that, I got involved with the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization's International Year of Pulses. In fact, I was their European ambassador, which was my most highly sort of title I've had over the years. It was quite an interesting one. But I then have worked a lot with cooking with children in schools. I've written a couple of cookbooks for children. The second one being called Green Kids Cook, which actually was sort of sparked when Greta Thunberg came to Bristol to the climate action school strike. And I was absolutely just bowled over by the sense of these thousands and thousands of kids from the age of probably about kind of 5 up to 18 packed onto College Green in Bristol. And when she stood on the stage, you could have heard a pin drop. Those kids were so engaged. And I really felt we've got to empower children with a way of doing something about climate change. And that's when, you really need to think about food as something. At school, they're taught about recycling and food waste, which is extraordinarily important. But I just think the way that cooking is taught in schools and the way that most children view cooking, it's all about kind of making cupcakes and little snacks and these kind of things, and not really, feeding yourself and your family. So I've worked with people like School Food Matters, and also there's a fantastic charity in Bristol called the Square Food Foundation, which is all about teaching people to cook really basic but nutritious food. And then my latest book, so a bit of serious product placement here, was actually commissioned by the National Trust, which is a book called A Good Appetite. And it's really almost like an adult version of my Green Kids cookbook. It's about cooking food that you really want to eat, because basically, nobody is going to continue to cook in a sustainable way if it's not exciting their taste buds and they're not enjoying it. But a way of being more mindful about going to suppliers that are sourcing food properly, and also making that direct connection between how you shop and how you eat and how food is grown. And I think that's absolutely where we're going wrong right now. So I'll come at this discussion from the sort of the cook and sort of teacher consumer side of things.
Great. Thank you. Peter.
Wow. I could probably simply start by saying I'm a farmer and very, I'm a new farmer. I'm a very recently adopted the life of a farmer, and it's also on a very, very small scale. I have it's more like a small holding in Somerset, and we grow vegetables, fruits, herbs. Also coming from a second perspective as a food producer, I have a business, I think you alluded to, called Cultjar, which specializes in preserved foods, prolonging the seasons. We specialize in fermentation and pickling and so on. So I'm a food producer, but we try to use our own ingredients. So I've got challenges around that, and I want to talk about that a little bit. And also, from a third perspective, I did about 25 years as a restaurant consultant and own restaurants in London for about 25 years. And I had lots of difficulties finding the right sort of produce at the right price and observing what's going on in the food marketplace. Well, those three perspectives, but also an interesting. Oh, sorry. Is that better? Thank you.
Dodge.
And Nick.
Hi, my name's Nick Sinfield. I co-founded a business called Teals, which is a food market, restaurant, gift shop, takeaway about 10 miles west of here on the A303. We opened that in December 2020. So we're into our 2.5 year now. And I suppose we started that enterprise because, A, we loved Somerset. I know we're in Wiltshire, but we're not far away. And we love Wiltshire and Dorset almost as much as we love Somerset. But we wanted to start something that could act as a showcase or a canvas for local producers like PYTCH and Cultjar and others who are creating fantastic products locally. We see ourselves as a bit of a connection between you as customers or consumers and those who are producing and making. And we take that responsibility quite seriously. We feel like we've got that responsibility. We need to promote as much as we can all of these guys who are doing far more amazing things than we are. We're quite a purpose-driven business. So what I mean by that, we're not simply in business to make money. We're quite cause-orientated. We feel alongside the promotion of local that we can do a good job in our communities and make an ongoing contribution in a number of different ways, whether that's through making those connections with our producers or by acting as a hub for local people to come and do their thing with us. We have a couple of boot camps at the moment, for example, which are oversubscribed, and we didn't start those. we had a customer of ours who arrived and said, "Can I run boot camps in the field?" We said yes, and that's now oversubscribed. They stopped marketing it, but and what that's doing is it's enabling those particular groups of predominantly women, I have to say, to grow slightly different communities and support networks alongside just getting fitter and leading healthier lives. So I think my perspective on this topic is that it's how do businesses like us provide those connections between you and those who are creating and making nice things, preferably locally, so that we can, through you, put money back into those communities and help enterprises like Cultjar grow, get out there in the world.
Thank you. So as a general approach to food in the UK and the systems that produce it, it feels as if there is something of a crisis going on. How has that happened, and when did that start? And what are the changes that have basically happened over the last 80 years?
I'd probably say actually there's changes over the last 2-3 years. Can you hear me now? Is that easy? It's still a bit dodgy.
I think your microphone just needs to be a little bit closer to your mouth.
A bit closer. That better? Okay. Well, what I was going to say is that maybe it may be the case it's over the last 8 years, but the last 2 or 3 years when people have started to think about, because of the pandemic, and started to think about or be aware of shortages in supermarkets, logistics issues, and people have started to think, well, I'll go to my local farm shop if they live in the country. I'll go to my local deli rather than go to a big shop, or get to know the growers. And lots of farmers have opened up their gates and said, right, come and buy directly from me, or had a little shop at the end of the lane or something like that. So I think and people enjoy that. The unfortunate thing, as we're going to talk about it, is that is ultimately and usually more expensive for the consumer. But it's better. It should be better all round, better on a number of fronts.
Jenny, can you just take us back? I mean, how did we get to that point that just 2 or 3 years ago we started to realise that? But how did we get to that point? Because we weren't necessarily having that same issue, say, pre-1940s.
Well, I think we've heard, if any of you were at the talks earlier today, that the war changed quite a lot when we started needing to produce far more of our own food in this country rather than importing. It developed more intensive agriculture in this country. But for me, the huge driver of change have been supermarkets and this kind of mass selling of products from multinational companies who are buying ingredients from God knows where and doing absolutely extraordinary things with them. I don't know if any of you saw the Panorama programme on Monday night about ultra-processed food. I would say watch it. It's really fascinating. I think when you come to a point when, Henry Dimbleby, who was appointed by the government to write the National Food Strategy, when he kicked off that National Food Strategy saying we need food that is good for us rather than doing us harm. I mean, you think, wait, what the hell is going on? We're in a situation now where 2/3 of people are overweight. 1 in 4 is obese in this country. We've got 4.3 million people with diabetes. It's not just the fact that we're trashing fields with what we're putting on them to grow these great monocultures of what, I'm sure some of you know these statistics, but over 60% of calories worldwide come from 3 crops, from rice, corn and wheat. And then we've got all these amazing things that we could be eating. And you go into supermarkets and there are aisles and aisles of all this amazing choice. And actually, when you boil down what most of those products are made out of, they're, those same 3. And then you've got, palm oil, soya. It's the same ingredients come up over and over again. They're also being modified in extraordinary ways. There are all sorts of emulsifiers and things being added to them. And this food is making us sick. And there are a lot of people who live, particularly in big urban areas, who really, that is the food that they have access to most easily. And I think it's fantastic that there are people like Teals offering people other choices. What worries me is that many people in Britain aren't in places where those choices are available. And then we'll talk about, prices later. But to me, the fact that we are filling our bodies, and over 50% of the calories in this country apparently come from ultra-processed food. That was something I picked up off Panorama. And over 65% of them in our kids under 18. And it's just not doing anybody good. And so for me, that is a broken food system, irrespective of the terrible things that are happening to the soil and to our wildlife habitats. The fact that we're not even doing ourselves any good in the process, it just seems to be an absolutely bonkers situation, and something that you can feel really quite angry about.
So there's an enormous amount of short-term thinking. Yeah, give him a round of applause. That was
Great.
very passionately put. So there's an enormous amount of very short-term thinking in the industrialization of our agriculture, our food production, and our retail systems that have completely disconnected us both from nature and our food. And nobody's really winning in the long run here, are they? And there must be enormous shareholders. Okay, so so there is one winner. But
can I just say something though? I think in terms of the short-term thinking, I think you probably added in confused thinking or not clear strategy. In terms of agriculture policy, lots of people have talked about, obviously we've got out of the common agriculture policy. Enough about this subject, but still going again. Oh dear. Is that better? Oh, when I turn that way. Okay, I will look straight ahead.
Because he wants to look at me.
So I want to look at you. Oliver, I'm not going to look at you.
Don't be offended.
I don't know enough about this subject, but I listened to my neighbours, my farming neighbours, and they're saying that all the things that's happening now with elms and being out of Brexit and so on, they've seen it all before, and they think it's all good. And they're being paid to correct the things that they did in the 70s and the 80s, making, when they were paid to take out the hedgerow, and now they're being paid to put them back in. They previously were paid to let things go wild, and the same subject's coming on again. But the general word is it's not been financially thought through, and it's not consistent. It's not entirely clear what the systems are. So I don't think it's just short-term thinking. I think it's confused as well. They don't really fully know what's going on. And I think if the farming system isn't right, then the supermarket system won't be right, that's feeding them and so on. So I don't think it's just short-term strategy.
So does that put enormous pressure on retailers to conform to that model? Or does it become, in essence, quite a radical act to try and break away and do something different?
I was just going to add that I think it's a very complex problem, is my understanding, having tried to get my head inside what's wrong. So I definitely agree with how we've got here. I think we're stuck there because it's so complex. It's a bit like climate change. It's such an enormous topic that we all feel, where do we attack first to try and make a difference? And I think the solution to that has to be some long-term thinking, pulling in different people from across the sectors, whether it's in regard to food strategy, the likes of Henry Dimbleby and the NHS and the various parts of government that would help solve the problem if they only talk to each other for longer periods of time. I think your question about how do we break the cycle? It is possible to break the cycle. So those of you who are not familiar with Teals, we're a farm shop in some sense in our spirit, and so we're not really competing with supermarkets. And a fair proportion of our guests who are coming through our doors are interested in a better quality of product, and Cultjar would be an example of that. It's a brilliant fermented product, and our customers are a proportion of our customers are really interested in that in before they even walk in through the door, and therefore they're reasonably straightforward to convert across. I think Jenny's point about how do you take that knowledge and intention amongst customers out there into the broader demographic, so that more of the stratas of life out there, and particularly those who are towards the bottom of the class system, or who are poorer than others, don't have disposable income, that can't make that choice necessarily. How do you get that message out to them? Because the message they're seeing is a buy one get one free for pack of processed cheese in another supermarket. And I think that's a difficult problem to solve, to get down to that level. I think it's reasonably easy and straightforward to appeal in a different way to an audience who are middle income and more affluent than that. It's much harder to solve the problem further down.
Yeah, I mean, that's inevitably going to be one of the first questions our audience will ask, in the cost of living crisis. There is a premium to be paid for the care, attention and detail to what might be seen to a lot of other people as this attention to detail, organic farming or regenerative farming processes that reflect a true price of food, where we consider the cost to the environment and weave that in. But it's going to be an uphill struggle for a lot of people to go, yeah, I'm going to pay that money because it's going to be better for the land and better for me.
It's really interesting. So I educated myself this morning. I rang, and knew I was coming here, so I rang one of our suppliers who I know has been under pressure financially with his supply chain. I said, tell me about what it's like for you, because we're once removed from you, and I need to understand it better. And this is where I think we can all be optimistic about what's possible. So he happens to be a milk producer. It costs him X amount to produce a litre of really good organic milk. He charges us quite a lot more to buy that milk from him than he does for his distributor buyer, like 3 times the amount more, just to put it in context. And that distributor, in the context of an environment where our milk producer is costing them more to make a litre of milk than it was a year ago, that distributor is driving downward pressure on what they're prepared to pay to that organic milk producer. So they now make a loss. 90% of their income comes from that distribution route. They make a loss on 90% of their income. And what enables them to survive is the 10% of their income that comes from businesses like ours or direct-to-consumer milk stations. And so I said to Matt, what's the solution? Because I looked at it, I thought, well, it's easy, isn't it? You take that 90% that's going to the distributor, and you find 10 times the amount of Teals and AN other distributors. You can actually, at that point, afford to charge them all a little bit less, and you can still make twice the amount of money that you are at the moment with your direct distributor. And at the same time, Teals doesn't need to make any more money out of that transaction. We can actually bring the price of organic milk down from £1. In our case, we sell organic milk for a litre for £1.50. Your average supermarkets at the moment are selling anywhere between £1.45 and £2.10 for that, by the way. We could bring our price down to £1.20 or £1.10. You as consumers, or we as consumers, could all be buying amazingly local organic milk for almost the same price as bog standard supermarket saver milk that we don't know where it's come from, and putting that money direct into that local farmer's pockets, with us providing a service in the middle to connect you both. So I happen to be really optimistic. Our price point is not down here. It's somewhere it's like premium middle, we would call it. But definitely there are ways in which we can all work together, but it does need everybody to have intention everywhere it needs customers to think, I want to buy organic milk because it's better for my kids. And it needs producers to do a good job, make great quality product, and it needs retailers to connect the two, and probably government or local council to provide a framework to facilitate all of that happening and the communication around it.
So it's a multiple approach. I mean, government obviously plays a role in subsidies or making that happen or promoting one versus another.
Well, subsidies, you could probably talk about ELMS in a minute, but if I just talk about the other side of it. So I think it does require localized investment, but targeted in the right way. And you'll pick up that point in regard to ELMS, I guess, in a minute. But it does require investment. But I think much more than that, it requires enough intention everywhere in the chain to make it happen. I was having this conversation. I don't know if anybody's come across Patrick Holden, his Sustainable Food Trust. So I was having this discussion with Patrick Holden a few weeks back, and I said, what can we do as a business? How can we help? And he said, Nick, you can do your bit, but actually what will make the difference is that there's enough awareness out there that everybody is pulling in that direction. Producers, consumers, retailers, hospitality, businesses, government, local councils, local investment funds. And that's what it's going to take. It's going to be quite a momentous effort, but it is possible. It is.
I don't know enough about elms to really comment on it, but in terms of government interventions and government support and so on, there needs to be something to be done to support more examples like what you're doing. And one other one that love him or loathe him, Clarkson, with his farm. Everybody's heard about Jeremy Clarkson's farm and so on. He started to try and do this farm shop at the farm. And I think that he was struggling with planning permission. But the local council said, and I might be slightly wrong with this, but I think the main intention is if he sold local produce, he could have his planning permission. If he sold a certain amount of it from the local community, from local growers, within a certain radius, 15, 20 miles or whatever, then he could get his planning permission. So I think we could encourage more of that, and then that will give the supermarkets a bit more of a run for their money. So,
yeah, I mean, I would say where I live in Bristol, it's quite extraordinary. We have 2 supermarkets on our street, and a third one is just about to be put in. They're the sort of the mini supermarkets, and you just think, yes, city planning or town planning, whatever, they need to intervene at this point and actually allow local shops to have some kind of preferential rates rather than just allowing us to be swept away by these huge companies.
tax is the answer.
Yeah.
A massive amount of tax.
So is it a sort of tax to replicate the impact we're having on the environment that's missing?
Well, environment and health. I mean, I just think it's not just the fact that we've got all the problems with obesity, which is leading to diabetes, but also, there are all these links with all sorts of other, with cancers and heart disease, the way people are eating, but also that is taking people out of the workplace as well. They've done loads of research to look at how people with chronic disease related to diet is taking huge amounts of money out of the economy because people can't go to work. I mean, it's all so interwoven that we really have to do something about it. I mean, one thing that I do think is good in the sense of raising the awareness of the consumer is this idea that doctors may well in the future be much more likely to prescribe ways of eating and directing people to eat natural whole foods. And when I say whole food, I don't mean a sort of whole grain. People, when you say whole food, everybody thinks you're talking about kind of a whole grain of spelt and they're going to have to boil it up and make you're just talking about a whole apple. You're just talking about something that hasn't been faffed around with. And I think at the point that if we can join all these dots up and, they're now talking about doctors within their training who historically used to have only about 2 or 3 days of nutrition in a training as a doctor, we'll be doing much more about nutrition, which will be making the focus of feeding ourselves so much more of an absolute core thing, which it should be. And then that takes you back to people respecting where the foods come from, because it's all interwoven, isn't it? We all know that if we eat something which has been loaded with antibiotics and is also probably not been fed particularly well, it's probably not going to taste great. It's grown really quickly. It's not going to have all that wonderful flavour. It's not going to be as good for us, even if we're looking at it in a purely selfish way. It's just all so tightly interwoven, and you just feel it's got to come from so many levels.
I think there is some message getting through from the doctors. So when I do these pop-up events and do workshops and so on, and at market stalls and things, I do get quite a lot of people come to me and say, my doctor has said I've got to eat lots of fermented foods.
Fantastic. Well, it's great.
So it's getting through it a little bit. But then they said, well, I don't know what is exactly that. I've heard of kimchi and so on. So there is some message going through. And
I worry that it's that bubble thing again, though, that I sometimes look on my social media and I think, oh, wow, everybody's fermenting and everybody's looking at their gut health, and we're all, wanting to buy our special sort of Iberico ham because we've discovered that prosciutto all comes from pigs who are crammed into, well, not all of it, quickly say that, but so much of it comes from, pigs that are crammed into these factory farmed lots. And you sort of think, oh, yes, we're all becoming aware, but are we? it depends the people you're talking to.
Well, people like Tim Spector and Mosley
Yes,
and
he's
so on,
getting out there.
They're putting the word out regularly. I mean, it's great for my business because almost every day I read a new article either online or on a national newspaper talking about the benefits of fermented foods.
Yeah.
And
so if you don't, you should listen to the Zoe podcast, which is where Tim is, which Tim hosts.
I'm a little bit concerned it might start to get overtaken by ultra-processed foods now because that's big on the agenda. But I think it's all part of the same subject.
It's all very much part of the same subject, isn't it? Yeah. And it's also links into food waste, which is another whole part of the discussion. I mean, there are so many little tiny cogs in this thing that need to be joined up.
So what are some of the simple things that we can be doing to improve food security?
Eat seasonally. That's very important for us in terms of, that was that rather cack-handed comment from Therese Coffey, what was it, 3 or 4 months ago about, let them eat turnips. Well, actually, at the same time that she said that, our fields were full of turnips and they were delicious. But trying to sell a turnip to most people is very hard. And what would people know to do with the turnip? How would you going to cook it? Do I steam it? Do I roast it? Do I boil it? Do I eat it raw? There needs to be an education piece around that as well. I mean, starting with the first education is, well, turnips are in season in this period. Tomatoes, don't eat them, don't buy them in December, tax them heavily. Don't allow people to buy them in December or January or whatever. Yeah. So I think the seasonal point is important.
So Nick, do you think retailers have a role to communicating what is seasonal, but equally, how do you cook a turnip so that it meets today's probably changing tastes? If we're so used to eating highly processed foods with large amounts of salt and flavorings added, how does a turnip become a desirable thing to eat to that group of people?
I think that's
that's a big.
I'm sure there's a ferment. I'm sure there's a ferment.
We do have a delicious pink turnip recipe that people could turn to, and if we could only get government to promote it nationally, that would be great.
But education and people getting more into cooking is such an important thing. And I mean, somebody like ottolenghi, thank heavens for ottolenghi, getting people into eating all sorts of weird and wonderful different vegetables. But we need that to be much more mainstream, people just not being scared of cooking. I mean, I think one of the classic things is baby foods. I have met people who've said they didn't dare prepare food for their baby because they didn't think it would probably meet the right kind of balance of ingredients. So they would rather go and buy it in a jar. And the jar, which has probably got, preservatives and has been pasteurised and everything else. And I mean, that to me it's tragic. It's really depressing. I just think so much of it is about people relearning how to cook, and sometimes it being really, really simple things as well. And having a bit more confidence about it and not assuming that something in a packet that 5 million scientists have been involved in creating so that it gives you the right mouthfeel is going to be better than something that they can put together in 10 minutes in a saucepan at home.
I think relearning buying. Sorry, Nick. Sorry. I think relearning buying because another example, you talk about relearning to cooking. So relearning to buying in season. I remember it was about January and there was this crisis. No, it was December actually, about the shortage of little gem lettuce. Again, at the same time, in our garden, in our polytunnel, in our fields, we had all this beautiful bitter leaves, and chicoria grows perfectly in this climate. Somebody came on and said, we just can't get any little gem, baby gem, from our supermarket. Christmas won't be Christmas without baby gem. And it was just crazy, and it was coming, the reason why there was no baby gem is because it was coming from North Africa. There was weather problems, there was Brexit problems, and there was transportation problems. And the supermarkets why are they promoting it? Why are they offering baby gem in
it's bonkers,
December?
Isn't it?
And Nick, how do you communicate the provenance of food in a way that makes people go, I get it?
So it's probably most easy we have a cheese counter and we have a butchery. That's probably and a restaurant. So those are probably the 3 areas where we've got the biggest opportunity because it's it's a more of a considered purchase and you've got more time to interact. So if I take the butchery as an example, well before we opened Teals, we used to buy our chicken. I'd heard about this guy who grew chickens down on the levels towards Langport called Jeff Crack. Has anybody bought Jeff Cracknell chicken? Oh, well done. From us. Oh, okay. well before that, we started Teals, and I heard about this guy, and so I cycled out to him, and he gave me a little tour of his chicken sheds, and I then only ever bought his chickens for about 5 years when we were living but slightly further north than where we are now. And then when we opened Teals, I rang him up and I said, "Can we stock your chickens? Because there's no other chickens like yours." And he said, "No." I was like, "Okay, why not?" He said, "Well, I don't produce enough. And so I've got butchers that have been buying my chickens for 10, 15 years who I don't want to let down." I said, "Okay, if that ever changes, let me know." So I then got into the habit of ringing him once every 6 months saying, "Hi, Jeff, it's Nick at Teals. Have you got any excess chickens that we can buy from you?" And he said, "No." And then completely out of the blue, he rang me 3-4 months ago and he said, "Nick, I've got some extra chickens. I could probably give you 10 a week." So I said, "Okay, let's have them." And Nathan, who's our butcher, he now has it. So we have 2 types of chickens, one from Ross down at Otter Valley, down the A303, and then a batch from Jeff. And Nathan gets to talk about Jeff's chickens and Ross's chickens to his customers. But that's not everybody buys. In fact, probably a smaller percentage of people buy their meat from butchery counters in the traditional way. Most people walk into the supermarket, they look for the chicken aisle. There's the chicken aisle. They want breasts, so they get their pack of 4 breasts. They don't consider that purchase at all. That's habitually how most people buy meat. We get an opportunity to talk about the provenance of the product, and genuinely, it is really good. Jeff, my kids the other day said to me, I've got twin boys who are 16 and a daughter who's 18, and we were sitting having one of their favourite barbecue chicken recipes, and they said, "Dad, I can now taste Teals chicken." And I said, "That's incredible, because the texture in it is so wildly different to what you would find in the supermarket." So back to your point about educating children, that's I think how you reach customers in a way that lights them up, and then they've got to decide, well, do I want to pay X amount more, or can I afford to pay X amount more for that chicken than I would do in my local supermarket? And I guess that's when we say, well, look, have a whole chicken, and how many are you feeding? 3 to 4. Well, that chicken can go through. You'd know what this is, Jenny's territory.
Oh,
but
so I've
that chicken
got
can
four recipes from one chicken in the book. In fact,
That's
it's
it.
almost as if we primed that.
Definitely didn't.
Which we didn't.
Definitely didn't. But that's how I think it works. And then suddenly that whatever you pay for that really good chicken gives you amazing, good nutritional value coming out of it. And you've learned that you can translate that into 3 or 4 dishes, and then it becomes really good value. Then it's actually really good value for a family.
So it's raising skill levels, education awareness is kind of key, both of the provenance, but also how you might approach one product.
Yeah, so the combination of great product, good information about it. We try not to preach. We don't really educate. I think we try and inform if we can, because we recognise that not everybody wants to have that discussion with us. But that's essential. So retailers can play a brilliant role in that, in my view.
So we're coming up to the point where we're going to open up to the audience for questions. How do you think, have you got any suggestions for how people can better engage with a healthier food system? So that when we all leave, we can go and explore something or do something or watch something. Obviously, you're looking at your book.
I wasn't looking at my book. I was actually,
there are other books.
There are other books. I was actually going to dig this out. I don't know how many of you actually read much of the National Food Strategy when it came out, but this is Henry Dimbleby's book, Ravenous, which is about the proposals he made and also just the discussion of our food system now. And I read it in one day because I just couldn't put it down. It's really, really well written. It's engaging as well as being absolutely loaded with information and some positive, what we should be doing to move forward.
Yeah.
So I'd really recommend that. I think it's an amazing read.
And if you're not a massive reader, there are also talks that he's done online, talking about the book. So you can just sort of watch him sort of describe it, and some of the incredible statistics in it.
Yeah,
that really outline the system and the state that we're in.
We're in. There's nobody replaced him, I don't think, actually, has there?
No.
So
no, sadly
now we
not.
don't have anybody
We have
championing
nobody
that.
championing and advising on that food strategy, but things may change.
Just picking up on a point, Nick was doing all this great work to sort of point out the provenance and say where the chicken has come from and so on. I think the opposite should apply, and that the supermarkets should have to point out where certain things are sourced from. To go back to my little gem example, they've got to have in big clear letters, sourced from wherever it is, so the consumer can see, well, actually, I'm going to turn down buying that delicious salad from Somerset, and I'm going to go for this one. Okay, it may be a little bit less expensive, but at least it starts the dialogue. It starts the understanding of actually, oh, maybe I prick my conscience. Maybe actually I won't get that little gem from wherever. I know we want to support all sorts of communities around the world, but the agenda today is really about local and affordability. And I think that the supermarkets should have to label the negative news as well.
Yeah. In the world of architecture, we have environmental product declaration labels for some materials. It's voluntary, but it doesn't necessarily state that it's a better or more sustainable materials, but it does lay the facts and the figures out about where it's come from, the embedded carbon, where it's the mileage, where it was produced. So it does put us in a stronger position to specify materials with a more educated stance. And I think, basically, if we can't measure it and understand it, we can't do anything about it. Any suggestions from you?
I'd definitely say just be curious about what's around you. So wherever you live, it always strikes me as interesting that increasingly people come to us and we didn't know that they exist, but they're still relatively local in terms of what they're producing. So I think being curious around, challenging your farmers who are farming locally and asking them what's coming off the fields. We have potatoes that happen to be grown on the farm, and cheese. Understanding when those potato crops are coming out of the ground, so that you actually go to the farm gate and see if you can buy a bag of 10 kilo spuds that have just come out of the earth, and then taste the difference between those and what you might otherwise buy. So be curious about your local environment. And I would say, if you, just as a kind of slightly light-hearted, if you want to slow down now and again from busy lives, which I certainly feel we have to, there are some great films out there that actually just enable us to just take us back to what really matters about food. One of them is this. Has anybody seen Honeyland? Anybody watched Honeyland? Amazing. All right, forget 50 of you watching Honeyland. It's the most incredible film about a honey producer in Macedonia. This old lady who's in her, I want to say, some late 60s, looking after her mother who's in her mid 80s and 90s. And it's just the most beautifully shot film that tells a whole horrible story about a traditional artisan product that is impinged upon and then recovers and sees itself through into brighter days. So I'd recommend to anybody, I think it's probably Netflix or somewhere, but readily available. Do watch it. It's an incredible way to spend 90 minutes.
Great. So we've got some time for questions. We've got Bex, who is going to be handing around a microphone. So do we have a question? Lady in the green dress, leaning against the hay bale.
Thank you very much. Really interesting talk. But I'm afraid we're all probably fairly converted here. It's the young woman, perhaps with 3 children. She's got a full-time job. She has to rush to the supermarket to get some food. How are we possibly going to engage her in the sort of thing we've been talking about? And nobody's taken it, just about Henry Dimbleby. The government has done absolutely nothing about what he said. He wasn't even at the last food conference at Downing Street. Anyhow.
I would open that up. In the kind of spate of loneliness that we're all facing, it's a whole generation of men and women and people who are struggling to buy food better in an ever busier world. So that question.
Well, I mean, when you talk about education, sometimes it's assuming it's related to the children, but it's not. It's also related to everybody at home, learning how to make, whatever, going back to my example from the turnips and so on. How do we get people to understand these recipes, to know the time involved with them, for somebody to create simple recipes using the seasonal produce, and as some sort of seasonality calendar that the people you're alluding to will automatically think to check it. I mean, that should also be the responsibility of the supermarkets as well. If they're going to be selling, whatever it is, onions or aubergines or whatever at certain times, that again, it should be down to them to put forward recipes, simple recipes that can be made on a budget.
Can we get them to
Yeah,
change?
how?
Yeah, who knows? How do we? No,
Yeah.
I really feel that a lot of the food which we see on television, or you see not so much on TikTok and those kind of things, because they do tend to be really quite quick. But a lot of the food we see on television, it's all this kind of master chefery and great bakes and things. And I actually think we could really do with more information about batch cooking, doing things where you can make one base recipe and do some really interesting but quite simple and quite economical things with it. And I think that's the bit that's missing. We seem to be getting lost in this whole thing of covering cakes in Barbie doll pink icing instead of actually getting to grips with making good, tasty food.
Okay, next question.
Your discussion and the question repeatedly comes back to the supermarkets. Ultimately, do you think the major supermarkets have too much power, especially over producers, and should something be done to control that?
I definitely think yes, and I think the answer there is government control, taxation, operating rules they've got to follow in terms of labelling a little bit more. Supermarkets are a big part, probably the biggest part. The distributors mentioned before, actually, I think is also quite a bit of a problem as well. But I think the sort of supermarkets are the biggest problem. The retailers, supermarkets are the biggest problem. How we're going to get them to change, I don't know. It's free market economy. I'm not sure. I don't know. Anybody got any answers? They're definitely the problem.
I mean, it comes back to that idea of the industrialization of the process all the way through, from the agriculture to the production of the food to the retail of it. And are there ideas or models that exist in one of those that could be applied? I mean, we've mentioned taxation, and maybe there is an environmental and a health tax that relates to that particular area, that if you're going to sell that junk food, that's completely fine. But we're going to have to pay for some of the healthcare. There can be a healthcare tax on it, or there's going to be an environmental tax on it if it's been transported. So maybe policy, taxation.
Yeah, I definitely think the government has to be more involved. Otherwise, there is no way of controlling these massive, massive companies. And ultimately, they put their name behind certain kind of charities and food. There's the Bike Back 2030 campaign, which is all about getting young people to voice what they want out of the food system to big companies. And then you get people like sort of Tesco's involved in that and helping fund things like that. And you just think how they need to be separate from the discussion. They need to be included and spoken with, but we can't have them funding so many of the discussions that we're having about our food system. Everything feels infiltrated. We need to sort of separate ourselves from the power of the supermarkets, I think, and the huge sort of Nestle's and Unilevers and people of this world. Sorry, I'm probably not meant to name certain names, but these huge companies.
I think if we can't mention them here, where can we mention them?
Yeah.
We're not being sponsored by any of them, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Can I just come in on that? Can I come back on that? So I think that they are part of the problem, but they are persuadable. So interestingly, if anybody's heard of Tony's Chocolonely, most of the world has by now. But so Tony's I don't know if anybody's aware of this, but they're famous for slave-free. What's what I'm looking for? Child slave labor and free chocolate. But what they've also started to do is they've created another supply chain where they're essentially offering other chocolate producers access to their new child slave labor free production model. And that's now being adopted. So Ben and Jerry's we'd all have heard of. Ben and Jerry's, how much of this is genuine, I want to be a part of that game, and how much of it is a bit of greenwashing, who knows? But if we take it face value for a minute, Ben and Jerry's are now using Tony's Chocolonely's supply chain to produce their ice creams that have got chocolate in them. So I think this is where there are businesses out there who can play a leadership role in pulling these kind of big behemoths like Nestle along with them, because that change will come, but it needs people to have voices. In the UK, some of you may have heard of Wild Farmed or Fresh Flour, who are promoting the use of regenerative, agroecologically farmed wheats in this country and gaining some traction. But interestingly, both of those businesses are run by people who were figureheads in other industries previously, who are quite good at talking. So Wild Farms, a guy called Andy Cato, who was former Groove Armada, for all of those who were around in the 80s, early 90s. He started Wild Farmed. He's a really great voice for that industry. And as a result of that, I think it's giving confidence to certain farmers to join that train, if you like. And what will then happen is it acts as a catalyst for greater change. So I do think it is possible to influence, but it needs some really active voices in quite big enterprises to be able to pull them all along.
Okay, thank you. One more question, gentleman in the hat.
It's a question about pricing policies at farm shops. Couple of farm shops round here, some prices that spring to mind. A sprig of Cavolo Nero, £3.50. A bottle of local beer, £4.99. A plastic packet of Moroccan-produced basil, £1.99. Up in Scotch Corner on the A66 in North Yorkshire, I spoke to the guys that run that farm shop. Those prices would not be tolerated. And their audience, their public, would tell them to bugger off. I wonder, what is value for money at a farm shop? I don't think, I'm a vegetable producer at a self-sufficiency level. I wouldn't want to pay £3.50 for a sprig of Cavolo Nero. I wonder what you might think about that.
Was it a real farm shop that was selling basil in plastic, and it came from where? Sorry,
it comes from Morocco. It's in the Udder farm shop on the A30.
Okay,
great. Let me respond to that if I can. So, if I use the milk analogy for a minute, so we buy milk from our producer at 3 times the price that they sell to a distributor. We don't make a massive amount of margin on that. I think as a business, funnily enough, we're quite embarrassed about pricing, in the sense that we really consider it. We're not there to, as I said earlier, we're not in the business just to make profit. The Cavolo Nero is a really interesting one. So we work with you might know them if you're a veg producer, but Nick and Tia, who produce this Wild Garden, amazing bagged salads from a little village called Galhampton. Really talented growers from a previous life and deploying that into local area. We sell their salad, and I forget what their Cavolo Nero is on our shelves, but it will be more expensive for sure than you would find on a supermarket shelf. If I use the salad analogy, we recommend to people who buy Nick and Tia salad from us to taste it without dressing. It's unbelievable, but you'll know this from being a grower. The amount of taste that you get in that product without any additions at all, no olive oil, no lemon juice, nothing, is incredible. And I think that's where the value is. But it requires that intention from a proportion of us to say, well, that's what I want, and it's okay to pay £4 instead of £3 or whatever the differential is in the farm shop. I think when you get into a secret, because I have to hold my hand on this because I was worried about it, I went into our store and I looked at, and we had some peaches in there, and I knew the peaches were, I said, how can those peaches be local? And they weren't. They were from Europe. And my first instinct was, why have we got peaches that are from Europe on our shelves? For exactly the reason that you've mentioned about basil from Morocco. And I think, I haven't yet picked it up with the team because I only noticed it yesterday, but on Monday we'll talk about that and say, why have we got that? And they'll probably say to me, you know what, we want peaches, we're being asked for them, we found a really great local producer internationally or a distributor that's brought us a product from further afield, because our guests they're asking us for it. And then we'll have a debate about, well, is that right or not? Actually, do we want those? Do we want any peaches that come from abroad, or not? And so I think it's your point about value is I think that people do take the mick. We definitely feel confident that we don't, and if anybody feels differently, then please come and talk to us about any of our particular products that we might have. We know that we can't compete with supermarkets, and we know that our products are good.
The point I was making, I think, is I feel that farm shop fantastic, but farm shop in a fashionable area in Dorset, Wiltshire, where people have got money maybe to burn, potential to overcharge and get a reputation for overcharging?
I think that's definitely. I think you're right. I think that would be an instinct that many businesses would have, and I don't believe it's relevant to us. If I'm completely honest with you, I don't read that as Teals at all, because we're totally the other side of the spectrum, albeit that we know that we can't compete on price with other businesses, and very happy to be called out on it if somebody spots something in our store and have a conversation about it. One thing that really helps with that, and maybe that's about your question about your young woman with 3 children. So we said to our local...
Or man.
Sorry, I thought you said woman, but I thought you said mum. But can be a dad. The local farm produces potatoes, and I said to Rory actually last year, I said, look, what can you do? We quite like the idea of enabling people to come and dig spuds, like you would go to pick your own berries or whatever. How do you feel about it? And he said, well, I can plant you a width. How many tons do you want? And I said, well, I have no idea, but he's planted that. That's why I say be curious about your local community and ask your farmers and challenge them, because he's planted that row, and we will now enable people to come and actually get those potatoes out of the ground. Great for that mum, because it'll be really inexpensive. The potato varieties will be relevant at that time of year, so a really nice opportunity to seasonally kind of inform and educate, and they'll taste great. And I think that maybe pulls your 2 strands together. It addresses your question that there are ways you can do it to engage, and it enables you to keep your pricing really sound for particular audiences.
Okay. Well, we've run out of time. Our speakers are going to be around. If you do have any other questions, please do come and have a chat. Jenny, I think, are you going to be in Fold talking to people about your book?
Oh, yes.
Of course, of course. Go and speak to Jenny about her book. So that just leaves me to thank our fantastic lineup of speakers, Jenny, Peter and Nick. Once again, please give them a big round of applause. Thank you also to the National Trust and Stourhead House for hosting us, for PYTCH, who have been doing the AV, for SolCell, who have made us, given us the opportunity to produce this off-grid with renewable energy. If you've enjoyed this talk, please do go to check out our website at planted-community.co.uk for more great articles, interviews, and conversations with materials and product creators. There's so much great content on there, so you'll learn an absolute load. And in the meantime, please do go and explore the rest of Planted Country. There are some amazing producers, food producers, furniture, products out there. Everybody here has got an amazing insight into how to produce things that solve particular problems, an incredible experience. So please do get involved. And thank you all for coming, spending your time, for watching this discussion. My name's Oliver Heath, and this has been Paying the Price for Food. Thank you.